Welcome into another edition of the Soccer Down Here 1v1. My name's Jason Longshore, and one that I've had on my list for a while now, as the first USL League One season has now concluded and all the preparations getting started for 2020. I wanted to check in with somebody who covered the league from day one. You know him on Twitter at Home Sweet Soccer. Jason W., what's going on?
Hey, first time, long time. Thanks for having me, Jason.
No, thanks for copping on. League One was something that, us in the SDH universe were really excited to see. I think we've seen the league kind of try to find a niche in year one. I think it found it. What jumped out to you when you started figuring out what your 2019 was going to look like and where you would focus coverage on? What was it about League One that grabbed your attention?
Yeah, I think with League One, it's an opportunity to find that local talent that wouldn't necessarily be able to play professional. And you have a lot of great players who kind of fall between the cracks because of that, right? And I think what USL is doing is they're setting up their own pathway, right? Their own system with League Two going into League One and the championship, to where it can really help showcase these players that are in Statesboro, Georgia, or that are in Greenville, that, haven't necessarily had the opportunity to play for professional clubs because there's not a real clear pathway for them. And so that obviously, kind of intrigued me. And then also having some of these MLS players and USL players get playing time that would also be on the bench, right? Like, it's one of those things to where a lot of these players who are getting these consistent playing, minutes and getting this playing time are going to be picked up by other teams now because of that. And had it not been for League One, that wouldn't have existed. And then, of course, also the community aspect, right? This is a league where, yes, you do have a couple MLS2 teams, but then you have these new teams who are bringing professional soccer to their city for the first time, and it's just exciting, right? And so you have these fan favorites, you see the team involved in the community, and it's just really that aspect of supporting local soccer, and it was just really exciting to get into.
Let's start with one of the big topics, I think, as the year went on when it came to League One, and something that there was some speculation that the League One would look very different very soon, with the MLS teams being forced to drop to League One. Doesn't sound like that's happening for 2020. Don't know if it's going to happen from a forced perspective in the long run. What jumped out to you about the difference between the MLS2 teams that were in League One versus the MLS2 teams that were in the championship?
I think it varies off of the ownership and what the goals are. So when you look at teams like Orlando City B, their goal was obviously to develop academy kids that they didn't necessarily seem to care about winning much. They didn't really do too much communication on social media or any kind of, press releases or anything. And so because of that, they were terrible, right? They were trash. They conceded the most goals in the league, came in last place, but they did get a chance to get those players some minutes and some experience against professional players, former MLS players, USL players, etc. But then you have teams like North Texas, who pretty much started off the year hot and had just dominated the rest of the way, right? They were challenged a couple times, but never really faltered, led the league in goals, had the league MVP and Arturo Rodriguez, have already signed a couple people to the FC Dallas professional team. So I think it just varies based off of the ownership and the goals of what they're trying to do, right? So you have teams like Tucson, who is the feeder team for Phoenix Rising USL Championship, and they have a good balance of developing players while also getting experience and helping them get to a higher level. And so I think that's the major thing right now when you talk about MLS2 teams coming down. It's a little iffy for a lot of League One fans because we don't know what we're getting, right? Are we getting the Orlando City Bees to where we're going to have teams know that they have a free game and it's going to be a 3-0 win that week? Or are we going to get teams like North Texas and FC Tucson who are going to compete and who are going to develop great players to go on to a professional team or a first team?
Yeah, I feel like at times everybody zeroes in on, it's a bad result for an Orlando City B, or Atlanta United 2 went through a bad run of form in the middle, but then really developed as the year went on. But you look at the two champions in the championship and in League One, it's both MLS2 teams. So yep. I think there is a balance that can be found and can benefit the league as a whole. But it is about the independent teams, and I do feel like that's the lifeblood of these leagues, and that's the strength, and that's what's attractive for the MLS2 teams. Let's kind of run through the League One teams from 2020 and just some quick thoughts on each of them. Start with a team that we've talked about since they came into the PDL in Tormenta, and a team that was the first announced League One team. We've seen a player now be transferred up the USL pyramid, Connor Antley going to Indy 11 next year. Felt like a very successful first year for Tormenta, even if they didn't quite find the success on the field they wanted.
And listen, if I am a owner or a team that is trying to mimic an independent team in USL League One, that's a team to do it for. Tormenta has done everything right from a front office perspective. They've built a system that works. A lot of their first teams were the PDL team from the year before, and that PDL team went undefeated that season before. And they're developing a system to where their players, this is exactly what you want, right? They have a downtown, they have their new stadium opening up next year. They have a system to where their League Two team beat a USL League One team in the US Open Cup. They have these players to where you have Kobe Perez and all these other players who from their League Two team were promoted to League One during the season. And so it's one of those things to where this is exactly the foundation and the system that you would want to see. So when you do have Connor Antley moving up the USL Championship, you do have local players that go, you know what? Connor Antley wasn't even starting a couple of times on the PDL team. He went from a bench player to then being starting as a player because of injuries to being USL League One Defender of the Year and now playing USL Championship, and all of that within a 2-year span, right? So this is the perfect system. And I think they came out the gates hot. I predicted that they would because of that chemistry, because they all came up together through PDL. And unfortunately, you had a couple things that happened in the middle of the season, right? So they were as high second place in the middle of the season. Lucas Coutinho went down with a bad injury that took him out for the rest of the year. You had players that were going to Germany and then with visa issues never got to come back. And so I think with them, you had a lot of injuries as well. And so I think what happened, it was just bad timing of everything happening at once. And it's because it's the first year, it's tough for that depth to kind of come in. And it's tough for those League Two players that got promoted to League One to just jump in as starters and not really get that kind of easy transition. So like I said, I think when it comes to a system, if you're an independent team, you look at South Georgia Tormenta. They didn't make the playoffs because of the slide that they had starting from the middle of the season. But I expect big things from them next year, despite the players that are making the jump.
The other two teams that didn't make the playoffs, feel like you're going to see the other two independent teams that didn't make the playoffs. I feel like you're going to see more changes than you'll see out of Tormenta. Chattanooga Red Wolves, Richmond Kickers have already announced coaching changes for 2020. Let's start with the Kickers. They were a team that, you're talking about one of the oldest clubs in American soccer and has had a lot of success, but it's been quite a while now since they've had that success. Darren Sawatsky is a proven manager at the second division, third division level. I think he's going to come in and kind of reignite what the Richmond Kickers used to be.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where Darren has a whole USL League One season under his belt with FC Tucson, right? So he's aware of the competition in this league. He's aware of the brutalness of the traveling, right? I think people, a lot of times these players, they're going from college into these teams. They've never had to travel cross country multiple times every week, right? I think Tucson, obviously the most travel team, them and Richmond, thousands and thousands of miles, and then having to do double game weeks, like that puts a lot. And so, I think for, first year teams with Richmond especially, it was a pretty much turnover of their USL championship side. They brought in a lot of new players. Coach Bulow tried to implement a system, whether or not you agree that you give coach a little more time than a year or 3/4 of a year to implement that system and really get the players he needs. That's, debatable on the executive level. But obviously, like you said, Richmond now wants to kind of reignite what they used to play, that style, that attitude. And, we'll see what they do this year. They definitely have talented players. Joe Gallardo might be from a talent perspective, the highest ceiling of any player in the league. It's just about him getting it together for his final touches or his passing. They have a player in Wahab Akwe who I was shocked that they brought back because I was for sure USL championship teams were going to look at him, and I still think next year they are. He led their team in clearances, blocks, interceptions, and aerial duels. They use him as a center back, but he can definitely play central defensive midfielder too and move them up if they need him to. They've got the talent there. It's just now about finding the right person to put it all together, and I think Darren's a good choice for that.
So one thing that Chattanooga Red Wolves and South Georgia Tormenta have in common is they're both putting literal roots in the ground and building venues. Red Wolves narrowly missed out on the playoffs, but they are changing man in charge. Jimmy Obleda will be the new head coach and technical director moving forward. What stood out to you about the Red Wolves' first season?
Yeah, and I actually spoke with Jimmy today, and so I'll be posting that interview
Nice
probably
tease.
next week. Yeah, but with Chattanooga, they were the team that always won or lost by one goal. It was always a one goal swing. It was either a draw or it was a win, that one goal. And we talked about it, with Jimmy today. Their back line, I think, was the weak link, right? So Alex Mangles, who in my opinion was the best keeper in the league, Dallas J for Greenville, who we'll talk about later, won goalkeeper of the year, and his statistics prove it, but no one took as many shots as Alex Mangles and no one made as many saves as Alex Mangles. He single-handedly kept that team in the playoff race for a while. And so that was their missing link. The back line just needs to be a little stronger and a little more consistent. They also had trouble scoring, right? So the games that they were winning, it was 1-0 or it was 2-1. And so they brought in Greg Hurst towards the end of the year. And granted, he only got to play maybe 7 or 8 games. He looked good. I think that they found the gem in him. They've already reannounced that they're bringing him back. And I think now with a consistent scorer and a back line, I think they'll be right back in the playoff hunt, especially when, Stephen Beatty, one of the most dominant players throughout the year, and unfortunately had an ACL injury, in the last quarter of the season, which is when they kind of started sliding out of that playoff race. They have talented veteran players. And the one thing that I think, speaking with Jimmy, that they're going to change up, though, is, Jimmy has a lot of experience with the youth and working with academies and coaching younger players. And I think Chattanooga, even prior to Jimmy's arrival, had stated that they want to focus on their academy and they want to focus on cultivating young talent and development. And so that's going to be a thing where you see the difference, right? You're going to start getting younger and faster players into that system and working with these veterans to where you're building a core that's going to be your core team for the next 4 or 5 years, as opposed to just having a team of all veterans that you're going to be, signing for a year and then letting go and then bringing someone else in. So I think Chattanooga will be right back in that playoff race. I would just like for them to see, and hopefully what Jimmy can bring, is a system and a style. I think that too many times, if you were to ask me to describe Chattanooga's style, I don't really know what to tell you.
Right.
A lot of times it was Stephen Beatty making magic happen, or a lot of times it was Pineda putting in a dime of a cross. It's just, I don't know what exactly, though, their tactics were, their playing style. So I'm hoping that Jimmy can bring something into that and make them more of a sexy team to watch.
You mentioned they were kind of one of the more veteran-laden teams in the league. Forward Madison had some key veterans, too. They got into the playoffs in the 4 spot. They finished 3 points ahead of the Red Wolves. I think a lot of people maybe who didn't follow League One all that closely know about Forward Madison. The marketing, the hashtag Fulmingo, all of it has been a really big home run for the league and capturing the attention. What do you think of Madison on the field?
Yeah, I think Madison on the field looked great, especially in that second half. And I think they started clicking around the U.S. Open Cup. And I think the difference between Tormenta and Forward Madison was Tormenta had those players move up and had experience with each other. So that's why they kind of started off the gates hot, right? I think they won like their first 5 or won their first 5 of 6. And Forward Madison it was the opposite, right? They had a bunch of players that they were rotating. They were trying to find their style. and it just wasn't working for them. Danny Tenorio, who I thought was a great prospect, he had an injury, so that made them change up their formation, their style as well. And then around the U.S. Open Cup, you saw them go, you know what? We're not going to focus on a sole striker up top. We have all these talented veterans who can play multiple positions. We're just going to have them float, and we're just going to have them all be forwards. And so those veterans like Don Smart, Paulo Jr., who played USL Championship at MLS, Josio Nunez, who just got called up to the Panamanian national team because of his performance this year. Those guys were just a hassle to deal with because they were able to come mid, or they were able to go wide, and they were able to draw defenders away from the other, and they all bring in certain skill sets, whether it's their passing ability or their shooting ability or their heading. They were a handful, right? They were easily one of the most prettiest teams to watch when they got into open play. JC Banks, another player who would just steal the ball in the midfield and then make these hard runs to where, through balls or crosses would come to him, and he would start the play off 60 yards away and then be the one to finish it with a header. They became a really fun team to watch, especially that second half of the year. We talk about front office success with Tormenta. Ford is right there, not just from the social aspect, but from their game day experience, from their fan base, from the players and their interactions with the community. Yeah, another team that if you're looking at an independent team to mimic, you would definitely want to be Ford. And a lot of that goes to Peter Wilt, right, who's like the godfather of starting teams in American soccer. And so, props to Ford because, they've already brought back those players that I've named, including Eric Leonard, who was an unsung hero for them at central defensive midfielder, who, had, top 3 in tackles of the year and duels won. And then, Brian Silvestre, their goalkeeper, who played for Philadelphia Union and who is an MLS caliber goalkeeper. They're definitely probably going right back into the playoffs. I'm not even going to say definitely, probably. Go ahead, guarantee it now. I think they're back in the playoffs.
Oh, that's a bold statement for 2020. Yeah. I like it. Here's something that's jumped out to me about this league. I think when League One was announced, everybody had an idea that it would be a bunch of very young players. The average age of teams would be very young. You'd have a lot of brand new professionals, and you've had a lot of that. You've had a lot of maybe professionals that you don't know as much about, but alongside those guys, you have players that if you followed the lower divisions, if going back to the NASL days, USL, all of it, you're going to know guys like JC Banks. You're going to know guys like Don Smart, players who have been very good in the lower divisions. And then you get your guys with some MLS experience as well. You get both in this league. And that's what's been, I think, very cool to see it evolve when you have teams like Chattanooga, like Madison, that maybe have more veterans mixed in, but you have teams that are very young out of the independent teams. We know the MLS teams are going to be very young. We know North Texas was going to be very young. But to have those players going up against your Don Smarts in a playoff match, that's really cool to see, and I think it's a great test on both sides of it.
Yep, and I think it affects the teammates as well, right? And so we'll talk about Greenville in a little bit, but Greenville did a great job of bringing in USL Championship players into the system, but then they also have their young core, and those are local players, right? Those are players who played for Asheville. Those are players who are 19 years old, like Bermudez, who came in and just, showed that he has the raw talent, and I think is someone that's going to be making a really big breakthrough season next year. And so they get that experience, right? They get to work. You look at Chattanooga, they get to work with guys like Eamon Zaid, who's been everywhere, and Stephen Beatty, and that's an opportunity that a lot of these 18-year-old, 19-year-old kids who are looking to go pro don't necessarily get from a PDL side or from, what they were getting from the MPSL or wherever they're coming from, right? So this is a great opportunity for them to learn from those players and get that experience that they wouldn't get before.
I'm glad you mentioned that with Greenville, because that's what stood out to me about Greenville Triumph in 2019, is that mix of veteran guys, players that John Harkes knew from his time in Cincinnati or just knew from being around the game, mixed in with those young players. And you saw, I think, what League One from an independent club perspective really feels like it should be all about is that mix, because all young players, it's tough. You don't have that veteran to lead them. All veterans, you can have some issues there. If you get the right mix, you get to a final like Greenville did.
Yep. And Greenville, another team right there, one of the only teams to really, have North Texas on the ropes. They unfortunately had injuries towards the end of the season. They lost their striker in Jake Keegan, who, was at one point in the Golden Boot race until he went down with his injury. And, that's a player, like we were saying, that comes up and, it's a great mix of, veterans that have played everywhere else. And then you have young kids, like I was saying, like Christopher Bermudez, who I believe is only 19 or just turned 20. And he, as you watch the season progress, became better and better. And I think working with Carlos Gomez and a lot of those veteran players helped with that. And so, yeah, I think you nailed it. I think John Harkes did an amazing job mixing local talent with veterans that, whether he was bringing them back from his FC Cincinnati days, like Tyler Polak, or, goalkeeper Dallas J, who ended up being the goalkeeper of the year. You saw that, right? I think his goal was, okay, I'm starting from the back. I'm going to build the best defense in the league because I think that's most important. And then working those kind of talented raw players in the midfield and in the forward positions, but having them work with veterans like Jake Keegan. And yeah, it worked. I mean, they conceded the least amount of goals. They conceded 23 goals. They had the most clean sheets with 14, tied with North Texas if you include North Texas's playoff games. But yeah, I mean, Greenville, at sometimes they, in the beginning of the season, they were, making those 1-0, 2-0 wins. And, it wasn't necessarily the most pretty soccer, but by the end of the season, you can see that those younger kids had built that confidence, had understood the game better, and they started killing it. And because of that, that momentum brought them into the playoffs and all the way up into the finals.
So North Texas ends up winning the regular season by 10 points. They end up winning the final as well. And this was what FC Dallas had been missing for so long, with so many young talented players coming through their academy. But the gap between the academy and MLS is gigantic. League One is a really good fit for a team. Like you mentioned early on, you've got some MLS clubs that want something different out of their second team. Maybe USL Championship with a little bit older player base has worked for them. You've got some like Orlando that want to be very young and they're still kind of getting their academy right. When you have an academy like FC Dallas and you can rely on young players, you get a team like North Texas SC that was just a blast to watch and delivered all season long.
Listen, I had a stat and I'll have to go back and look, but they had almost 20 players that were passing at an 80% accuracy. That's all you need to know. This team was absolutely like a well-oiled machine. These kids know the system, went into it, and had no issues. And that's why you saw some of them get called up into MLS, right? Like Ricardo Pepi started the year as their striker, started the year with a hat trick. Didn't take long for FC Dallas to go, oh, okay, this kid is ready. And now he's coming off the bench for FC Dallas. The league MVP is going to be another one. Arturo Rodriguez is ready now. And a lot of people look at him and go, oh, well, because of his size, maybe he's not ready for the physicality MLS. Nah, because he led the league in almost every offensive thing, but as well as duels and duels won and tackles won. So he's just an incredible player that I think is ready for the jump. And you've seen a lot of players in that system. Ronaldo Damas, who was the Golden Boot winner, right? Imagine having the star striker of the league. He gets called up to MLS, and now all of a sudden your backup striker comes in and then goes and wins Golden Boot. Like that's the kind of system that North Texas has. It's almost not fair at times. But yeah, and then also one thing that when we talk about priorities of these MLS2 teams, what do you think North Texas is doing right now? They have a partnership with Bayern Munich, and they are over in Munich right now training with Munich's academy. And so you have these North Texas players over there right now training, and they're getting scouted not just by Bayern, but reports are coming out that 4 or 5 other Bundesliga teams are scouting with them right now. And now one of their players, Thomas Roberts, is actually trialing or training with one of those Bundesliga teams. So now not only are these kids getting experience of playing domestically with professionals, now they get to go to the Bundesliga academies and train with their teams, and some of them get to train with the first teams. Like, that's incredible experience, and those partnerships and that ability is going to draw the attention of local talent. It's going to want people to go, you know what? North Texas is the way to go. This is where I need to get into this USL system. This is the best development. And you gotta give it to them. If you're going to have an MLS2 team in League One, that's what you want.
It's all changed so fast with the player development kind of pathways, and I think it's only going to continue to evolve. Before we get into big picture with League One, we do have to talk about the one big failure, and that's Lansing Ignite not coming back for 2020. Right. What's your take on kind of maybe just what went wrong, what didn't happen that they expected to happen? Because I think the biggest thing that USL has really gotten right in the last maybe 3-4 years has been the sustainability. And you go back in history, and I mean, I went through it. I saw it firsthand with teams that would come and go, and that was a big knock on USL. It led to the breakaway that created the NASL, and then ultimately they were the ones that didn't have the sustainability, and USL figured out what changes to make. Lansing kind of slipped through the cracks. It's something that I don't expect to happen a lot in League One, but what happened here?
What happened was, this is a case of when you bring in people who aren't soccer people that want to own a soccer team. This is a case of the owner who had high expectations and pretty unrealistic expectations when it came to attendance and, money. And anyone who gets into soccer professionally in this country knows that first year you're probably not turning a profit, right? You have to be the darling of the league to turn a profit. And so for those who don't know, the owner of Lansing is also the owner of the minor league baseball team in Lansing, the Lugnuts. And I guess he thought that, okay, I'll get a soccer team, have them play in the baseball stadium. I'll have two teams in one. I can save on rent. I'll make this money. He just was not expecting, the profits and stuff that they did make, right? And so he decided to jump ship early. And that's just what happens when you don't have people who are soccer minded coming into this league or into any league, expecting to turn profits first year, expecting to have a high attendance. I think he said that he expected 6,000 people or 7,000 people every game in the first year, which is something that only Ford Madison is doing, right? And so it's one of those things to where it's a shame too, because when you look at the GM and Jeremy, and you look at what they did in bringing in Coach Nate Miller from Lansing United, he brought in talented players. They might have been the most fun team to watch in the league. Offensively, they were fun to watch. They played a high pressing offense and defense to where they were stealing the ball. They were putting pressure on constantly. They had great depth. And it's a shame that this happened because they have great players. They had a great fan base. Just because they weren't bringing in 7,000 doesn't mean the 3,000, 4,000 that they were bringing wasn't good enough, right? And I think the biggest lesson of this is, the league or whoever, it's really kind of vet out your ownership, right? See what they want. And, there were tons of rumors about his true what he really wanted, right? There was a rumor that Lansing was going to be the feeder team of a USL championship side that he wanted to open up an hour away. And because he obviously folded Lansing, that's not going to happen in Grand Rapids, which is where the USL championship team was going to be. But yeah, just the fact that a guy came into it thinking, okay, I'm going to have this club play here, and then it's going to be a feeder club to this, and not really have any soccer experience or not really commit to anything, like maybe USL League One needs to have those 2-year minimum commitment deals when it comes to owners, right? Or maybe they just need to have a better process. But I think that's where it went wrong. And it's a shame because, that community does have great fans, and, Lansing has great players who you'll see shortly, I'm sure, would be picked up by a ton of USL League One teams and probably a couple championship teams too. And I wouldn't be surprised. You look at players like Nick Moon, for instance. He was a player who tried out for the team and then ended up being one of the best players in the league. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him in MLS, and he'll definitely be in USL Championship at a minimum. But it's a shame that those type of players, right? Like the idea of League One teams is to find those type of players and get them on a pathway to pro. And after what I consider a successful season on the field and even off the field, it's a shame that an owner kind of has that ability to dictate whether or not that culture lives. And yeah, unfortunately, he decided it wouldn't.
Yeah, it's the hard thing about it. I mean, having been on that side of it, it is a business, and there are profits that need to be made eventually, and there's only so much money that some people have and are willing to lose on it. I get all that, but my hope with Lansing is that the seeds that were planted here, and you saw that crowd, and you saw what it could be, isn't completely washed away for good, and that's what happened back in the day at times, where you'd have a USL team come in and be there for a year and then fade away, and it kind of soured the market on what a soccer team could be. And I hope Lansing, if anything, showed that, hey, done correctly, this can be a great market. It just needs the right people kind of driving it. Honestly, it doesn't even need a difference in the people driving it. It needs a difference in the person cutting the checks. Yep. And that's going to be the number one thing that as League One grows, you see that. Sometimes you have misses in year one of a new project, and that was the big miss for me with League One. You do have 2 new teams coming in, and they're 2 MLS teams that we know about so far, in addition to Omaha, and we'll get to them in a second. Inter Miami and New England. So New England has already announced a manager in Clint PA, who has a ton of experience on the youth side. It sounds like they will be a very young-ish team. I hope from a quality standpoint better than Orlando, but I think they're in a similar situation where New England is really starting to invest in their academy, really want to grow it. This will be part of it, but maybe the academy production isn't quite at the level of some of the other teams like a Toronto or an FC Dallas, and maybe it's going to take a year of some growing pains.
Yep, and I 100% agree with you, but I do think the difference is the ownership, and Bruce is committed to development in academy, right? And true. So and PA is his boy. They go back. Mm-hmm. And PA also worked in USL Championship as an assistant for North Carolina FC last year. He knows the system. He knows how the game works. So I think, like you said, yeah, it's going to take a year or two. But the difference between them and a team like Orlando's front office has just been a terrible discombobulation for the past 3-4 years, right? They don't have a system.
I gotta use that one. That's
good. They don't have a system. They didn't know what they were going to do. There was no real direction. They fired Orlando City B fired their coach in the middle of the season, and so when you do that, you're not really giving any kind of a chance to implement any kind of a system or any kind of a style. And so another thing Orlando City B kept doing was they kept rotating players. And so we didn't see players play for more than 3 games in a row for pretty much 3/4, almost the whole season. It was just absolutely ridiculous. And so I think when you talk about New England and what they're bringing, I 100% agree. It's definitely going to take time. I think it's definitely going to be a lot of the younger kids, especially defensively. We're going to see a lapse. But I think they've got a front office and they've got a board that is committed to building that. And I can't say that I see the same with Orlando, although Orlando looks to be making better steps as we talk in the offseason.
Makes total sense. And I think a lot of Orlando City B's kind of 2020 will be dependent on who comes in as the first team manager. And it's not a direct correlation, but Orlando City lacking that identity that New England found in Bruce Arena coming in and really putting his imprint on things. Orlando City has to get that for the Bees to be where they could be. Inter Miami is kind of a who knows at this point.
Yeah, it's
you do have Jason Christ, who's there and he knows the landscape very well, but he was also interviewing in Real Salt Lake. So how really in there is he? And he's got the US U23s to deal with. There's a ton of questions. I do love that they are in it from day one with a second team to help build their club, though.
Listen, I'm a gambling man, Jason. I'll admit it. I don't have a problem, but I like to indulge in a little bit of betting once in a while.
Fair
There's
enough.
a single amount of dollars that I would ever bet on Miami because we just don't know what's going on right now,
Yeah.
right? They apparently have had their head coach on their first team for the past 8 weeks, and yet
The shadow manager.
yeah, we still haven't announced it. I don't know necessarily what's going on with the stadium situation. It's a lot right now. So for this first year, I think eventually the baby Beckhams will be exciting. But I think for this
Oh, is that
first
nickname
year,
gonna stick?
that's what I'm going to try to. That's what I'm going to try to. So
Okay,
I
I
think,
like it.
yeah, this first year though, I'm washing, right? Like I just don't know what to expect. It'll be nice for me to take a road trip to Miami. Definitely something that I'm looking forward to. But yeah, I don't know what to expect, and we're already, we're a couple days away from December. League starting, in March. Are you going to put together a team, a coach, your development stadium, and everything in 3 months? I don't know. It's just a lot for something to happen so short term, and because of that, I'm not gambling on anything. I don't want to set any expectations. I'll just be thankful that they have a team in the league that's actually competitive.
I will go out on a limb. I don't think it's quite as big of a limb as saying Inter Miami will be in anywhere in a playoff race next year, but Union Omaha and their logo is the best in the lower divisions. I love what they did with that logo.
You'll have a lot of Ford Madison fans mad at you, but I
I
can't hate
know,
that.
I
I
know.
listen. I know it's a strong logo. It is, and I said when it came out, it's one of my favorites. I'm still the name's slowly growing on me. I'm not
I'm
the
okay
biggest
with it.
fan of the name, yeah, but yeah, you're right. Strong logo, strong color, strong crest. Yeah, I'm with you. I can't wait to pick up a scarf when I make my trip out there. And talking about them, right? They've done the complete opposite of what Inter Miami is doing. And so what I mean by that is they already have a USL Academy team.
That's
They
awesome.
had an academy team pretty much before they announced the first team. And not only do they have an academy team, that academy team recently played in the USL Academy Cup for the Western regions, and they were smoking teams. They were easily the second, third best team at that Academy Cup. And the way they did this was they actually worked with local youth clubs, right? And they trained the kids and provided full funding for that Academy Cup trip for free.
That's awesome.
That's how you do it.
Yeah.
That's how you come in to a community and you say, look, we are trying to form a pathway to pro for these players who have not had it before. And instead of us feeling like, hey, we're coming in and taking away your club players, let's work together. Let's go ahead and we will train them once a week or however long. We'll take them on this trip. We'll get them exposure to other scouts. You had college scouts there. You had scouts from Mexico there. You had international scouts there. That's exposure that those kids weren't going to get on a club team. And then what USL is trying to do in this academy system is they're trying to put money back into the club teams, right? If a club player ends up signing to a USL academy team who then signs a pro contract for the USL team and then gets sold, whether it's to Europe or another team, they're putting money back into the clubs and so the local clubs, and that's how you do it. That's how you bring soccer into a community. And if that's their initiative before they even announce the player on the senior roster team, I'm excited to see how they're coming out the gates, and I'm excited to see what they build out there.
Yeah, I love how that's coming together. That's great to hear. And that's one thing to keep in mind about Miami is that you have a strong academy that they've started already on the MLS side. So they'll have young talent to bring through. They just haven't been able to really build much else yet. So, could they get like a North Texas type of level of talent? Maybe. South Florida's got it. It's just, there's so many unknowns. We'll have to wait and see. Is there anything else you're hearing about what League One could look like in 2020? I know Penn FC and the Rochester Rhinos had been mentioned a while back as League One teams. We haven't heard anything else about them. Looks like it's going to be a little more time for them to get back on the field. Is there anything else potentially coming up?
Yeah, no, I think this is what we've got, right? I think the teams that we know about are the teams that we have going into 2020. There's still a couple of teams that need to make roster announcement. North Texas made theirs today. A couple of interesting names that weren't on there that I expect to be picked up from other teams like Alf Hussein Ejada, who I think could play USL Championship he maybe gets another half season under his belt here. But yeah, I think right now we kind of have a good idea of how everything is going to work. We kind of have an idea of what the teams look like. Both FC Tucson and Toronto FC to do a good job of interchanging players between the first teams and the USL League One teams. And I think this is going to be the year where you see a lot more USL League One players get called up to USL Championship, right? I think it's one of those times to where, even like Toronto FC too, they had success where Jacob Schaffelberg started USL League One, was playing very well, got called to the first team and went out there and in his first game, I think it was against Atlanta United, unfortunately, had 2 assists and was the man of the match of that game.
Was outstanding in that match.
Yeah. And I think when teams see that, that opens the door. You look at Lansing Ignite's goalkeeper and Stephen Cleveland, he was loaned down from Chicago. Had he not been loaned down to League One, would have sat on the bench all year. Instead, came to Lansing and pretty much jump-started their run. They had the most amazing streak in the league to where they didn't lose a game for 4 months, something crazy like that. And he was a big reason for that. And now, as you see, yesterday he gets picked up by Seattle Sounders. And so I think a lot of teams are looking at this league, and I don't think they expected that the quality of this league was going to be as good as it was. I think when we talk about MLS two sides, when we talk about Orlando City B, that's the first thing that comes in people's heads. Oh, it's going to be a bunch of 16, 17-year-olds who can't match well with veterans or who can't really match on the defensive side. And we didn't see that. Instead, we saw a well-oiled machine in North Texas. We saw veterans with Ford Madison and players who, like I said, Josiel Nunez gets called up to national teams now because of that, because of the league that we have and because of the experience and because of the style of play and the actual quality of play. So I think a lot of teams now are going to be looking, and you're going to see mid-season when teams figure out their needs in the summer and say, okay, for us to make a playoff push, we need to solidify our left back side or whatever. You're going to see those players make the jump. You got players like Christian Diaz for Ford Madison already training with Minnesota United because they've already spotted, wow, that's an asset that we need. And if injuries happen or if we need someone at depth, that's someone who, he was 4th in the league in interceptions. He was top 5 in tackles won, duels, and he really changed the way that Ford Madison played. So that's a player that I think you'll see get called up in the middle of the season next year.
That movement between the levels in American soccer is so important. It's something we haven't seen enough of in the past with second division to first division, but that Connor Antley move from Tormenta to Indy 11, I hope that really starts to open people's minds about that kind of movement. I'm glad you mentioned Schaffelberg as well, going from League One to MLS and immediately having an impact. I think, when you look at the very big picture of USL League One and lower division professional soccer, to do it at this level, it does take a significant investment. To be professional, you've got to have the resources to put that out there and to portray a professional club. And I think that's something that, people are learning about. I mean, we see what's going on with NPSL talking about professional. We've seen NISA launch and have some hiccups in its first, kind of showcase season. How important is a Division III professional league for you when it comes to player development?
Yeah, like I said, this is the one area to where you as a 18-year-old, 19-year-old in college or fresh out of college get to play with players like Amin Zaid and get to play with former MLS players and get that experience and get to, hit those long road games and understand what it's like to have those away days and those double game weeks. And this is the only time you can do that, right? Because a lot of USL Championship sides with their salary or with their roster compliances, they're not going to take a chance on those kids that have raw talent but need that playing time experience. And this is where a pathway between Division One all the way up to MLS is formed, right? Like I just talked about with Ford Madison, Christian Diaz might have a chance playing at MLS next year. This is for, the Stephen Cleveland to get to play in MLS next year. This is essentially the missing piece, I think, to really create a pathway. Because if you go from League Two to USL Championship, I think from the competition level, it's too different, right? I don't think the best player in League Two might be able to be on a USL Championship bench. But what about all those other players who still need time to really get that talent and to monetize it and to really sit there and learn the game, right? I think this is the perfect league to do that. And I think because of that, a lot of teams are taking notice and they're saying, you know what, this team is developing players well. And you talk about the Connor Antley thing, I'll let you know right now, that's not going to be the only USL League One player we hear jumping up the USL Championship. And the fact that Indy 11 is compensating Tormenta for that shows that that's how that system needs to be.
That's the trick.
You've got these teams that are developing these players, and it's domestically, right? My co-host Ira Jersey had a great discussion on our podcast, League One Fun, about why are we not taking a chance as MLS teams on USL Championship players and domestic players? Why are we spending the same amount of money on college super drafts when they don't have the experience of playing against professionals, and they don't have the experience of making those long road trips, and they don't have the experience of what it's like to play in a pro league for a whole year? That's the kind of things that I think is missing, and I think that's the kind of things that League One brings. You can go get a proven player in Connor Antley who has shown you that he can compete against former MLS players and people of MLS caliber, instead of taking a risk on a 20-year-old who just graduated, who has all the raw talent, but it's going to take 2 or 3 years to really get that together and focus it and put it into a game that can be compatible with the MLS team or compete against MLS teams. Connor Antley can do that now, right? And that's what I think teams are noticing and seeing, and I think that's the missing piece. I think once you develop a system to where, okay, these League One teams are doing a great job at developing these players, let's go ahead and give them a transfer fee, buy these players, and then we'll be able to send them up to MLS. MLS needs to be doing the same for USL Championship independent teams. And then that's that system to where you really start domestically developing great talent.
It's that business. I mean, I think now what I've noticed calling MLS games for 3 years now is that even from 2017 to 2019, the level of importance of the Super Draft, for example, it's not what it used to be. There's not as many players who are coming out of that straight into MLS and having an impact. It's very few, and usually it's players who are coming out of, before they came to college here, they're coming out of a foreign academy. So that's a smaller number now. It's going to be the guys, and this is where I feel like the interaction and the partnership between MLS and USL is mutually beneficial. It's going to be those guys that your second team coach or your affiliate team coach sends you a report and says, hey, we played against Indy 11, and Connor Antley, he's a guy you might want to keep in mind because he fits what we need. He fits a need that our team has. We don't have depth at that position. We can go add him right now, and I've seen it firsthand. He can play. It's that level of knowledge and interaction that's going to change this paradigm a bit. And I think there's been a lot said about, USL and its growth and the partnership with MLS, and I know it's awkward for some of the independent teams, but I think both sides have really benefited from it, and I think that's only going to continue to grow.
Yeah, and I think USL too, and this is just my opinion, obviously, I think they're doing a good job of not necessarily separating themselves from MLS, but giving themselves that opportunity. Like, well, you know what? If MLS doesn't, if they still want to go after college kids, or they don't feel like they should be going up and down and getting our players domestically, then why don't we have our own academies? Why don't we sign players to pro contracts so that if we sell a player to Europe, we get to keep that money? That money gets invested right back into us, which allows us to build better academies that can compete with MLS academies. And before you know it, USL has their own system to where they're sending players off to foreign countries and getting compensated for it. And then those club teams that help develop those players are getting compensated for it from a local standpoint, which does nothing but also help development of local players. So I think that's what USL is doing a good job at. And like I said, not necessarily separating themselves from MLS, but really having an understanding to where, well, we don't want to actually depend on MLS. We don't want to rely on them to have to give us money when we send them players. So let's go ahead and think of a way to where we're the ones developing these players. We're the ones that are investing in a Division III league. What can we do to keep that money within the system?
It's key. I mean, that was how USL was going to grow, and that is one of the things that I think we'll look back at in 2019 and say could end up being one of the most important things for U.S. soccer's development is
Yeah.
that Academy Cup, that Academy League at the USL level, because, look, MLS is only going to be in a limited number of markets, even as they continue to expand. You can't be in every market in the country, and whether it's USL Championship or League One, and I've said it since I started in soccer, like, there's no reason why a kid born around Statesboro, Georgia, can't be a national team player. In the past, they didn't have the opportunity. They didn't have the resources. Nobody knew who they were. Now, there's an outlet. And as
Yep.
many USL teams, Championship, League One, and League Two, can create an academy structure and train players in a professional way, you're going to develop more talent overall.
And yep, and you nailed it. It's not just on a MLS and domestic level; it's a national team level too. You've got players like I mentioned, Josiel Nunez getting called up to the Panamanian national team, Jordan Perusa of Toronto FC too, right? He is easily the best off-ball timing and runner I've seen that's not playing in MLS. You put him against any USL championship team, hell, you put him against half of MLS teams. That boy's timing and finishing is impeccable. And he's already playing for the Canadian youth national team. I have no kind of doubts he's going to be playing for Toronto's first team and the Canadian national team. And had it not been for this league, if Toronto's playing championship side, they might still be loaning down the I can't remember their backup's name, Akin something or Ayo something. But the point is, Prusa might not get a chance, right? He might be overshadowed, but because there's this Division 3, they're not really they're not really pressured into playing the bench players of Toronto's first team. And because of that experience and the playing time he's gotten, I know his stock is skyrocketing. And I know for the youth national team, they're like, oh, you solidified your starting role here. And he's someone that I think is going to benefit. And you're going to see when he has success for the national team, on the senior national team, it's going to be a lot of thanks for having Toronto FC2 in Division 3 soccer.
This has been, I think, League One and a successful first year is going to end up being one of those things that, when we go back and do a, best of the decade thing 10 years down the road, I think League One and its launch in 2019 is going to be something that 10 years down the road has a huge impact on American soccer, and not just in the markets we're in now, but in markets that we could see League One come into down the road. And we've seen a League Two team in our neck of the woods in Asheville City that has moved over from NPSL. That could you see them in USL League One? Absolutely. And there's so many markets like that at this level that could come in. It feels like the sky's the limit for the league.
Yeah, and it's funny you brought that up because that's exactly what their owner said, right? They joined League Two, and he was like, "That's cute and all, but our goal is to join League One. We have nothing but focus on becoming a professional soccer team. They already have a great youth system and academy system, and I have no doubts that they're going to do it. And those teams have the ambition to do it. And yeah, like you said, I think this is the start of something to where you're going to be able to bring out players like Connor Antley, who without League One might not have even had a chance of playing USL soccer, right? And so this is it. This is the beginning of something special. Like I said, I think one thing I really hope that the league does is vet out these owners and make sure that they get ambitious owners like you have in Asheville. And as long as you do that, the talent is there. And now that League One exists, we're able to find it in spots that we weren't before.
Yeah, the talent side's the least of my worries when it comes to the growth of the lower divisions. And I know some people get worried with new teams popping up all the time. The talent side's not the worry to me. I think the talent's there. It needs to be cultivated. It's that vetting. It's that sustainability. It's clubs that have a long-term future and have a plan to reach that long-term future. And that's going to be the key. Whether it's USL League One or you can take that over to NISA and NPSL if they do pro stuff, or anybody else that's considering it, the sustainability long-term is the ultimate goal here. And I think at times that's been left in the shuffle and lost in the shuffle. And in general, USL League One got that right in year one.
Yep. I mean, you mean the key is not to just charge expansion fees and keep doing it until you grow 50 teams in the league?
Yeah, I've seen that happen before, and when teams come and go every year and you can't keep up with who's in the league, that is not a good thing at all. And
It is
I
not.
feel like USL's learned from that, and I hope that, that there's plenty of room for lower level professional soccer in this country, and I hope that anybody that is going to do it is a proper steward of the game and does it in the right way. And I think League One so far has done that, and hopefully continues to grow with clubs like Omaha and then Inter Miami and New England Revolution coming into the league next year. Anything else that you're looking for in 2020 out of League One?
I'm looking forward to these opening of the downtown stadiums and seeing the effect it has on the community. It's one to just have a soccer team, come in, you develop, these players and these academies, but then to put it in downtown, have shops and everything around it, you have more of an experience that starts from kids, right? So you go downtown, you go to Dave and Buster's or wherever, and then you go to a soccer game afterwards, and then that becomes a tradition, and that becomes, you start ingraining yourself in that city, in that town, in that culture, and that's how you grow. You gather fan bases from a young age, you gather that loyalty, and I think that's what I'm excited about, right? Those players then start working within the community, whether it's volunteering, they become a part of the community. And you've seen that with Greenville, right? Like you've seen that with fans greeting the team even after their loss at the airport to congratulate them on even competing. Like that stuff, happens with some teams, but very rarely. And you're starting to see that happen with every team in League One. And you're starting to see that these people are concerned about the well-being of these players and the development of the academies and the development of the team itself. And that's important. And so I think, having those downtown stadiums to show, hey, we're a part of this community and we're doing what we can to show that, I think that's going to be a big step for League One teams going into 2020.
Our 30-minute recap of the League One season has went an hour now. So
I told you I rambled.
No, there's so many things to talk about. It's been a blast, and I hope people that maybe didn't follow League One as closely in year one are excited about it in League Two. Let everybody know where they can follow all the great stuff that you're doing.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Home Sweet Soccer. If you want to just get, kind of an update of what's going on in League One, me and Ira Jersey host a podcast called League One Fun. That's League, the number one in fun. So you can find us on Twitter, and then the podcast is available to wherever you guys listen to podcasts, whether it's Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Monograms, anything. We're there. And so I'm excited to bring you guys some players that you're definitely going to see in MLS, you're definitely going to hear of, and then you can be part of it. You can be a hipster and say, oh, I knew about that player since he was playing for Greenville. Who doesn't want to do that, right? You get to be the American soccer aficionado. So
make sure you're following Home Sweet Soccer on all your social media accounts to keep up with everything happening in League One. Jason, man, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And we'll be talking to you again as the 2020 season comes up here in just a few months.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'll let you know who Atlanta needs to be looking at.
Oh, good. We need that extra scouting. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.